Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. While the peace movement opposes wars and our violent foreign policy, we recognize that the individuals who serve in the military or who are veterans after having served deserve human rights like everybody else, and we support them as people. When the military establishment hurts them, they need to protect their rights, and we need to stand with them. Also, some active duty troops and some veterans have found ways to work for peace, and we support that as well, and they do that sometimes at great personal risk. This month's TV program examines all of these concerns with special emphasis on Coffee Strong, a GI coffee house near Fort Lewis, which is now called Joint Base Lewis McChord. I'm happy to welcome our guests, Jorge Gonzalez and Joseph Carter. Both are veterans from the war in Iraq. Jorge Gonzalez is Executive Director of Coffee Strong. He's on the Board of Directors for the national level of Iraq Veterans Against the War, IVAW. And he's also active with IVAW's local chapter. Joseph Carter served as co-executive director of Coffee Strong, and he's also president of IVAW's local chapter. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Glenn.
We will have an informative and interesting program, and so let's get this rolling. I want to get some basic information about Coffee Strong, which is the GI coffee house near Joint Base Lewis McChord, and we'll talk some more about Coffee Strong in about 15 minutes or so, but let's just get some basic information. What is it and what does it do basically?
The one thing it does right now is we provide services for soldiers, veterans, and family members. We provide services for trying to get help with post-traumatic stress disorder, or whether a soldier has a problem with his commander or something legal within the military. We provide GI rights counseling for them. Also, Fridays, we also have Veteran Benefits Assistance Day. Dennis Mills is part of that. He comes in with a group of his friends.
Yeah, Mark Fleming.
Leah. They help veterans get the assistance, the benefit assistance that the military is not telling these soldiers that they deserve. Right. So they help file paperwork and advocate for them, and in case something goes wrong with that, they will help you.
Great. And we should let the viewers know how to find Coffee Strong. It's on Interstate 5, exit 122, go west, and then turn right onto Union Avenue. It's at 15109 Union Avenue Southwest. It's right near a Subway shop and very near to Fort Lewis. Let's find out about your own personal experiences, and then we'll sort of move from there into the larger scene. What were your own experiences when you were in the military, and what have you done since that led you to doing this kind of work now?
Yes, I was a armor crewman, which is a fancy word for tanker. Fort Lewis at the time, we didn't have tanks, so I became a striker vehicle commander. We were in an infantry unit, and when I deployed, June of 06 to September 07, 15 months in Iraq, different parts of Iraq. It was still in my contract when I discovered Coffee Strong. I would come in for free Wi-Fi, free coffee, and I was still a Republican pro-Bush supporter. Listening to guys like Joseph and other members of Coffee Strong at the time really opened up my eyes to what I did in Iraq was not okay. Our purpose in Iraq was not okay. So I did my research, and slowly I started getting more involved with IVAW and Coffee Strong.
Mm-hmm. So you came in as a customer initially and ended up running the show.
Some say it's a fairy tale kind of, or it's a great success story.
Yeah. Upward mobility.
Yeah, definitely.
Joseph, what did you do in the military? What was your experience, and how did you get into doing this?
Well, I joined the military in 2002, and in 2003 I was part of the invading force of Iraq, so I helped invade Iraq, and about halfway through my first deployment, I began questioning the war in Iraq because we had there were no weapons of mass destruction found, and I looked around and saw the mass poverty in the country. And that got me interested in sort of understanding the history of the Middle East. Despite the fact that I was against the war, I went again in 2005 and helped occupy that country for one more year. I left the military in 2007, and in 2008, when Coffee Strong opened, I was actually there opening night. I had a friend who invited me, and I went there and I met a bunch of the guys there. I'd never heard of Iraq Veterans Against the War or Coffee Strong. I knew nothing about it. I just was a veteran sort of on my own who was against the war, and ended up talking with some of the folks, and then I started volunteering there in the summer of 2009, and ever since then I've just been working at Coffee Strong and trying to be involved in the GI resistance movement.
During the Vietnam War, most of the people who went to Vietnam got sent there just once. And nowadays, some people are deployed to Iraq and or Afghanistan multiple times. And during the Vietnam War, a lot of people had PTSD, and it seems to be much worse now, especially because of multiple deployments. Can you tell us something about the extent of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or other experiences that people are having because of these ongoing wars? The Afghanistan war is now the longest war in United States history.
Yeah, well, actually, the RAND Corporation, which is sort of a quasi-governmental non-profit corporation that does research for the military and for the Department of Defense, actually put out a study back in 2008 that showed that at least 20% of soldiers come back with either PTSD or some combat-related stress disorder or major depression. So we know that at least by the government's own admission, at the very least, about 20% come back. And that rate increases, and the risk of that, of a soldier getting PTSD or some other form of combat stress-related disorder increases every time they go back to Iraq or go back to Afghanistan and participate in war. So right now, like I said, 20% is sort of the number that's very solid.
What else are people experiencing in terms of just the realities of being there, the day-to-day realities there, or the tension between that versus normal life?
Well, I know that from my experience, I would say that my experience with the war was very much like, I've heard this said before actually, that it's long periods of boredom punctuated by sheer moments of terror. Mm-hmm. I would say that sort of characterizes my experience in the military and my experience with the occupation of Iraq. A lot of people in American culture are sort of raised to see violence as very normal. We see violence every day on TV, we see it in video games, and especially young men are sort of taught that violence is very normal, but actually being involved in violence and being involved in violent acts is actually a very traumatizing experience, and there's nothing that can really prepare you for that. No amount of video games, no amount of television can really prepare you for that. So I don't find it very surprising at all that we have young men and women who are raised in an incredibly violent American society who are prepared, who think that they're prepared to go to war, end up going to war and coming back actually very traumatized by the experience, which can lead to some confusion on their part because we, like I said, in American society, think of violence as being very normal.
Yeah. And besides those problems that you mentioned, the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression, there are other kinds of mental illness, and we had suicides, domestic violence, and you're probably seeing some of that.
Yes, we have gotten reports, definitely lots of, since the beginning of 2011, we've had 11 suicides just alone on Joint Base Lewis McChord, 5 since July 1st, and that is one big increase from 1 a month, something like that, to 5 in a 3-month window now.
Yeah.
We also have other cases of soldiers torturing their daughter. One was waterboarding her own daughter, or his own daughter. There's more. It just keeps going and adding up.
When we were preparing for on the telephone for this program, you mentioned that the military's response typically is just to try to medicate people with antidepressants and then not deal with the real problems.
I can relate to that. That happened to me. I came back. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, with depression, with suicide thoughts, activity. I was put on medication and sent back to my unit I was never really treated again, or I never really saw more counselors, psychiatrists. I would come in, they'd rewrite my prescription, take your drugs.
Yeah, and then the unit commanders can sort of override best medical advice.
They can override anything.
Yeah. So they send people back who were documented with.
Definitely, they need that number to deploy in order
Yeah.
to deploy.
And then that makes the problems worse then for those guys,
Definitely.
guys and gals.
Absolutely. You have the military's care system is not actually meant to prevent or to cure people with PTSD. It's to keep them at a level in which they can function just enough to get prepared to go back to war again. So we might have a soldier who comes into Coffee Strong who might say, I need help. I haven't necessarily been diagnosed with PTSD, but I know something's wrong with me. Mm-hmm. The military is not going to keep that person back unless they've been diagnosed with severe PTSD, and even then, there's no guarantee they'll be kept back. So a soldier like that who knows that they're very depressed, maybe having suicidal thoughts, unless they've been diagnosed with some very, very severe case, the military is going to send them back to go to war until something really terrible happens, like what we've been seeing at Joint Base Lewis McChord, where we've had 5 suicides since July, 11 suicides since 2011. We've seen numerous acts of PTSD-related violence, including domestic violence. So
there's also traumatic brain injury, TBI, that seems to have been the new epidemic. Tell us what that is. I think a lot of people in the general public don't know what traumatic brain injury is.
Traumatic brain injury comes from a lot of different things. Personally, while in Iraq, I did get my vehicle blown up, improvised explosive device, basically an IED. I was unconscious for about 10 seconds, and upon my return back to the States, I didn't go home because of the injury. I stayed my full tour. But we get tested. We have to see a psychologist or psychiatrist because of a questionnaire that you do when you return from deployment. So depending on those results, you have to go see this person or that person, or you're perfectly fine from what they tell you. So they did the simple quizzes. Remember these 5 words. I'm going to talk to you a little bit. Can you remember? It's basically memorization loss.
Yeah, but that's not going to get at a real brain injury. That's a sloppy way of diagnosing something.
Some do get CAT scans. It's very expensive to get a CAT scan, so they really don't push it or pursue it when you're bringing up things like chronic headaches.
Both of you mentioned on the phone when we were preparing for the program that there's the Department of Defense came out with a new app for iPhones to deal with PTSD. Would one of you tell us about that?
So the DoD right now is producing and has produced applications for iPhones that are supposed to be sort of technological check-ins, so that soldiers, if they're feeling maybe down, they can get on their iPhone and take a look at maybe some symptoms they're having, and that app might tell them that they have PTSD, or that maybe they should go see a psychologist because they're at potential risk for having PTSD or a potential suicide risk. But the reality of those sort of applications is that it's really just a way to throw sort of money at a problem rather than fixing the root cause of it. And the root cause of it is that we're sending soldiers, we're sending troops to war, and we're also sending them to war multiple times. The real root cause of the problem of these multiple deployments, you're not actually going to get at that real root with some silly iPhone applications.
Yeah. The newspaper here in Olympia has just been full of articles just ongoing about here's another suicide or here's another case of domestic violence or whatever. And well-meaning politicians like Patty Murray and others, U.S. Senator, say, well, let's put more money into treatment and stuff. But with that epidemic of suicides and mental illnesses and post-traumatic stress disorders and all these other things, depression and stuff, it's a public health epidemic. It needs to be examined, I think, from a public health standpoint. If you have an epidemic, you don't just treat the victims of it. You have to get at what's causing this epidemic and then go after the root causes, as you're saying. And it's the multiple deployments, and it's just the whole notion that, I think, it's the whole notion that we train people to use violence and to dehumanize other people so that you can do violence to them. And then when they get back home, they have that to operate from when they're dealing with their wives or girlfriends or kids or society as a whole. And it would seem like the analogy that comes to mind would be, suppose the government was spending $500 million or $500 billion a year trying to urge people to smoke more cigarettes, and then they discover, oh, there's a lot of lung cancer, and then they say, well, let's put money into lung cancer treatment, when they should say, let's stop spending that money, advertising for cigarettes. I mean, it's like you get to the root cause, and it seems like the war is the problem, and the violence. If you were to look at it as a public health epidemic, which I think it is, and it's just ruining a lot of our communities, including those of us near here. Does that make sense, or is this an off-the-wall?
No, it definitely makes sense. Joint Base Lewis McChord recently spent $53 million on a wounded soldier building to house soldiers and take care of them. But what they don't understand is you're not going to help these soldiers with a brand new building. You have to use that $53 million or that billions of dollars you use on the war to treat the soldiers, to hire more medical staff.
Yeah.
Not just bring them in, write them a prescription, or say there's nothing wrong with you and send you back to the unit.
And better yet, stop having a violent foreign policy.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the military, in order to continue functioning, in order for these wars to continue, the military has to keep sending soldiers who have been traumatized over and over and over again. Yeah. If 20% of the military who's been deployed just stop deploying, if every soldier who's ever deployed once and has been traumatized by that situation never deployed again, the military would have an incredibly difficult time conducting the wars. The reality of it is that they need warm bodies to send to war, and they're going to find a way to do that. And the way that they sort of cover that up is by saying, I read somewhere in the newspaper that they have like 23 or 29 programs on Joint Base Lewis McChord for suicide prevention. It's clear that those 29 programs aren't working. It's clear that it's just a screen in order to make people think that they're doing something of substance. Yeah. That's not what's going to do anything. The reality is that you have to get at that root cause, which is don't send soldiers to war, and especially don't send them multiple times.
Yeah, if those, like you said, if those 20% were to not deploy, refuse to go, we'd have a healthier society instead of compounding people's disability. We had a tragic case here at Fort Lewis that you were involved with Ashley Joppa Hageman's husband, who had committed suicide. Tell us that story and what you did. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense under W. Bush, wrote a book, and he was on a speaking tour to hustle his book. Tell us what you did with the widow of this soldier who had committed suicide.
Yes. Very briefly, Ashley Joppa Hageman came to Coffee Strong when she heard there was a speak out event for Derek Kirkland, who killed himself after being deployed to Iraq. Tried to commit suicide numerous times, finally got back to the States and committed suicide because he was deemed a low risk. So Ashley Joppa Hageman, her husband Jared killed himself, on June 28th, about to face his 9th deployment to Afghanistan.
Whoa, he'd gone there 8 times already.
As an Army Ranger, yes.
Whoa.
So he requested to see PTSD counselors to seek help because he knew there was something wrong with him. They let him go for about 4 or 5 days and told him basically, no, it's time for you to return back. Like, you can do this on your own time, but when you're in a unit like the Rangers, you have no free time. He then tried to exit the Ranger unit because it is a voluntary unit. They would not let him release him. They stuck him away in a small, where they send the troublemakers, the ones who don't fit the norm of the typical Ranger. So on June 28th, he did kill himself. And we are fighting, we are trying to help Ashley Joppa Hageman right now. One of the things we did was Donald Rumsfeld was coming to on base, Joint Base Lewis McChord at the PX, Post Exchange. He was signing a copy of his new book. I saw it as a perfect opportunity to have Ashley let someone in power know, this is what you did to my husband. You're one of the architects for this war that killed my husband. So we approached, finally got in line, we had the book. She whipped out her funeral program with Jared's picture on it. This is my husband. He believed your lies to join the military. Now he's dead because he did not get the help that you and many other politicians asked him for. Mm-hmm. So then we did get kicked out.
Uh-huh. I appreciate your courage and the savvy way you went about raising that issue. It's good to have that feedback loop to those with the formal
Definitely.
power. Let's talk some more about Coffee Strong. At the very beginning of the program, you sort of laid out briefly what's going on. Can you tell us something else about Coffee Strong's purposes, origins, and past activities?
Absolutely. So Coffee Strong began as a project that came out of it's based in the history of the Vietnam War era. During the Vietnam War era, GI coffee houses popped up all over the country.
I remember there was one there called the Shelter House.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it was on South Tacoma Way, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and it was a place for soldiers to come and sort of get away from the military and speak their mind about the war, and a place to find other soldiers that feel the same way about the wars, and for them to sort of interact with activists that may not ever come in contact with soldiers. A lot of activists tend to be very sort of put off by soldiers because they don't know much about military culture. So Coffee Strong was started based on that, out of that sort of history. And what we do is sort of continue that history by providing a space for soldiers who want to talk about the wars or talk about alternative points of view on the war, or maybe talk about PTSD or whatever they're dealing with in their military life. But we also provide things for soldiers. We provide links to resources. Like Jorge mentioned, we have the Veterans Disability Benefits Counseling on Fridays. We have GI rights counselors in there 3 days a week. We provide them with links to other resources that are off base, such as Soldiers Project Northwest. They provide counseling for soldiers. And we also do events for soldiers. So we have open mic night every third Saturday of the month. We have concerts that we put on. We also put on events where soldiers have an opportunity to speak out. Recently, we had the State of the Soldier address, which was great. We had active duty soldiers speaking out on issues and voicing their opinions and sort of exercising their right to speak up and tell people, regular everyday citizens, what's going on.
There was a documentary film made that was showing in Olympia a few months back, and I went and saw that. It was very good, and so that's around and available. Coffee Strong has copies of the DVD that people can buy.
Yes, we do.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's called Grounds for Resistance. It was done by a professor at the University of Oregon. Her name's Lisa Gilman. The film's shown all over the country, and I believe it's going to be showing somewhere in Germany here pretty soon. We're really excited about that. It's a really nice documentary. It sort of shows like how how Coffee Strong started and all of our struggles, and the way that all of our victories, where we've sort of been able to help soldiers out. It features war resister Travis Bishop in there, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
I think he's an excellent example.
And you also help Leo Church and others, so you're a resource. And with a low enough threshold that it would be easy for somebody who's on active duty or a veteran to feel comfortable.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. In September, we had a soldier come in, just sort of stopped in and sort of quietly walked up to the counter and started having a conversation with one of our baristas. And it turns out that he's interested in getting out of the military because he doesn't want to go to war. And we've linked him up with the GI Rights Hotline, and we're going to be working with him to help him get out of the military if that's what he wants, which that's what it seems like.
Yeah. What are some of the current things you're doing? I know you mentioned, like on Fridays, Mark Fleming and Dennis Mills and Leah
Swanson?
Yeah. The help that they've been doing, and I know you have ongoing things. Are other current projects underway?
Currently, we are working with Ashley again.
Okay.
Our campaign it's Operation Recovery, which is to end the deployment of traumatized troops with PTSD and TBI and military sexual trauma. We laid out a list of demands that we are proposing. One is a congressional investigation of Joint Base Lewis McChord with all the recent negative activity that's been going on there. A letter of condolence from President Barack Obama. President Obama only writes letters of condolences for soldiers who commit suicide while they are deployed to a combat zone, not when they bring the problems of the combat zone back home. Okay. That's one other thing we're working on. Other demands, she wants a letter of apology from the Ranger Unit Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hodney, that's his name, And also they, once again, are denying Jared Hageman a memorial service. So that is back on the table again.
So you're doing really substantive work for that individual family, which is real. So the work you do, is very personal. It's not just an abstract or theoretical thing. You're really at the nitty gritty of it.
And we're not just sticking with Ashley's story, but
Yeah.
we are like Ashley's story is bringing out other people. There's been more family members and mothers who want to help out.
Well, and you've gotten good press with that. You were on Democracy Now! In late August and on September 1st, and again, it's been picked up by more mainstream media.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So that's really, really good. So Operation Recovery is a significant thing to be working on. What else can you tell us about Operation Recovery?
Like Jorge said, Operation Recovery is a campaign to end the deployment of traumatized troops. So that's soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder, any combat-related stress disorders, any service-related stress disorders. That includes military sexual trauma. Military sexual trauma is not something that comes out in the media very often, but it's estimated that 1 in 3 women in the military are sexually assaulted, and 2 out of 3 women are sexually harassed during their time in the military. So what we're asking, or what we're demanding, is that soldiers that have been traumatized by their time in the military are not asked to deploy again. And at the very local level, at Joint Base Lewis McChord, like you said, we're not looking for abstract sort of, we're not making abstract demands, we're making very concrete demands. We want a congressional investigation done on Joint Base Lewis McChord. There have been too many cases of PTSD or combat stress related incidents coming off the base. We've had soldiers murdering wives, setting wives on fire, waterboarding children. We had the Afghan kill team. There's just too much stuff going on the base. On top of the 11 suicides we've had just in this year, 5 suicides since July. There's something going on at Joint Base Lewis McChord that's not being taken care of. And the worst part about it is that people like Patty Murray and Adam Smith, who are right here, Patty Smith is a member of the Veteran Services Committee, and Adam Smith is a member of the Armed Services Committee.
For the Senate and the House, respectively.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Those two. That this is in their backyard, and this is going on, and clearly nothing's being done.
Right.
So we're making demands that base be investigated.
Yeah. And I know you're working on, as we tape this program in September, you're planning to mark the 10th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan, and you're planning to mark the 3rd anniversary of Coffee Strong for November of 2011. So do you have any ideas of what might be coming up for any of those, or is it still too early to tell?
It's still early to tell. We do have an event coming up in about 2 weeks, which by this time this airs, it'll be over. But we will be adding more, having more events on October 7th. Definitely working with Ashley because her husband was about to deploy to Afghanistan. 10 years going on, still deploying there.
Both of you are active also with Iraq Veterans Against the War, and the Operation Recovery is a project there. So so you work well with a variety of groups, and you're the president of the local IVAW chapter.
Yes.
Tell us about Iraq Veterans Against the War and the work that you do.
Iraq Veterans Against the War is an organization made up of active duty service members and veterans who have been in the military since September 11th, 2001. We have 3 points of unity. Those are that we demand an immediate end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We demand reparations for the people of Iraq and Afghanistan for the wars that we've committed. And we are demanding full benefits for all veterans. So that includes folks that have gone AWOL, folks who have decided to resist war, so those are our 3 points of unity. Those are our 3 main demands. But Iraq Veterans Against the War in the local community is very active in trying to organize soldiers to speak up and to speak out about issues like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, and that's the way of empowering oneself, taking back some power that's been taken away. And you see this in all kinds of constituencies who've been victimized in some way or another, is when they can speak out. It's like empowering. It's like recovering your voice. And IVAW has a website at ivaw.org.
Correct.
Which has a lot of good information, including information about Operation recovery, which we've been talking about. Let's see. I want to mention some other organizations that that also are connected in various ways. Coffee Strong has started out with GI Voice. Tell us something about GI Voice.
GI Voice is the parent company of Coffee Strong. So Coffee Strong, you could imagine as sort of a big tent organization. Like you had said, you'd use the term low threshold. It's a place where soldiers don't feel pressured by an overly political message. They can come in and get help no matter what their political stance is. But GI Voice is much more active in trying to organize soldiers to speak up for themselves and to improve their daily conditions. And so ways that soldiers can do that are by, let's say, filing an Article 138, which is a redress for grievances. So they can go to their command or to Congress and say, there's something wrong on Joint Base Lewis-McChord, or I'm not getting the help that I need. I demand that you take a look at my grievances. We also ask soldiers to speak out at events like the State of the Soldier Address. We ask soldiers to stand up and tell their friends about organizations like IVAW or about Coffee Strong, and let them know that they're not alone if they have the feelings like that they're against the war, or maybe that something's going on at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Because military culture is such that soldiers aren't given a voice. Soldiers are told from day one that you need to shut up and do what you're told. And so the concept behind GI Voice is like, no, you have rights in the military. You have rights to blow the whistle. You have the rights to express your political opinion. You have the right to be treated fairly. And we're going to encourage that as much as we can.
Okay. I want to mention a couple other organizations, and we have a little lettering that'll appear on the TV screen so people can contact these groups if they're interested, and they'll also appear at the end of the program with the closing credits. One is the GI Rights Hotline, and they do wonderful work. I know they have trained people who know how to help out with procedural problems, like if you're AWOL, how to fix that, or if you're exploring conscientious objector status, or various kinds of things. And they have a toll-free hotline, which is 877-447-4487, and the website is www.girightshotline.org, with no punctuation except the dot before the org, www.girightshotline.org. So that's a great group, and I know a number of the national level groups have been supporting that, making that happen. Locally and nationally, we have Veterans for Peace, and Veterans for Peace had helped Coffee Strong's origin and helped paid for the big sign that's visible from I-5.
Absolutely.
Which is really cool. So Veterans for Peace, their website is www.vfp.org. Then locally, the Olympia chapter of Veterans for Peace, the Rachel Corey chapter, number 109, is active. Their website is www.vfp109rcc.org, and they can be reached by phone at 360-867-1487. And they do a number of good things. And Mark Fleming and Dennis Mills, who help you folks out on Fridays, are both active. And the Veterans for Peace interacts well with the other peace organizations. FOR, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, does things jointly with them. There's another group that has actually been active since the early 40s, and that I've been financially supporting since '72. It used to be called the National Interreligious Service Board for Conscientious Objectors, and some years ago they changed their name to the Center on Conscience and War, and they do really good work about conscientious objection and other matters of conscience related to war. And so you can reach the website for the Center on Conscience at War at www.centeronconscience.org. They're a very good group based in Washington, D.C. They do really well at trying to connect with the federal government to make sure that the federal government actually respects conscience. So that's always an uphill struggle. Another group going back to the 40s is the Central Committee on Conscientious Objectors, CCCO, and they've been very good. They have a website at http://objector.org, And they have a lot of links to related organizations at their website. They're very good. I've relied on them a lot. In Seattle, there's a small group that's connected and localized, the Seattle Draft and Military Counseling Center, and they go back at least 40 years, back to the Vietnam era, and that's at www.sdmcc.org for the Seattle Draft and Military Counseling Center. There's another group I've been supporting, Citizen Soldier. I don't know if you have much contact with them, but they do some good things some places. Do you have contacts with them?
We have a little contact with them.
Yeah. And they're at www.citizen-soldier.org. And then Courage to Resist has been very vigorous. They've been very supportive of Bradley Manning, whom we'll talk about in just a moment. Courage to Resist has a phone, area code 488-3559, and their website is www.couragetoresist.org. And one of the projects they've been working on a lot is helping Bradley Manning. Could one of you tell us something about Bradley Manning and what he did and what happened to him?
Well, with Bradley Manning, I would say that when it comes to talking about Bradley Manning, as far as we know, has only been alleged to have leaked the massive number of documents to WikiLeaks that have come out as the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, and Cablegate, which is a number of diplomatic cables. So he's been alleged that way, alleged to have done that, but is being held without trial. And during his time being held without trial, he's clearly been tortured. Maybe not in the same way that we think of torture, but he's clearly been left naked, lying on a cold floor, in solitary confinement all day long with only an hour to exercise. And so we at Coffee Strong openly support Bradley Manning. One, because nobody should ever be tortured, and certainly a soldier in the United States Army should not be tortured and should not be held without trial. But also, if in fact he did leak those cables to WikiLeaks, then he's done the American people a great service by showing them the inner workings of our government, which is incredibly important. We should have transparent government, and you shouldn't be tortured for showing that we need transparent government to show the secrets that have been hidden from the American people.
Well, we remember the Pentagon Papers when Robert Ellsberg released documentation from the top levels of the United States government showing that they knew that they were lying to us about what they were doing in Vietnam, but they had a different story for the public consumption and a different story for Congress, but they knew that they were really lying.
Yeah.
And Robert Ellsberg, many people think, is a great hero for having exposed that and brought the truth up in the analogous case as Bradley Manning. A lot of people may have seen or heard about that video documentation of the helicopter gunship that attacked this minivan that had some journalists in Iraq, foreign journalists, and minivan with a dad and his kids.
Mm-hmm. If I lie in court, it's considered perjury. If the government lies, it's considered public relations. Right. So if Bradley Manning did leak everything to WikiLeaks, the only thing that he's actually done is just shown that the government's massive PR campaign is actually a massive number of lies to the American people. So we 100% support Bradley Manning.
And he has broad support from a lot of people. There's a Bradley Manning support network at www.bradleymanning.org. And you've got posters up supporting him at Coffee Strong, so it's no surprise where you're at on that matter.
No, some soldiers do come in and they are very wary on whether they should be coming in here or not. They see the Bradley Manning poster and make some jokes about it. I don't know if I should love this place or hate this place. It's what recently one quote that was found in there.
But you're getting people to think about it.
Definitely.
And as both of you have been saying, you want people to reflect on their own situation and see what they can do.
Yeah, it gives us an opportunity to have a chance to talk with soldiers. So if a soldier says something like, I don't know if I should support this place or if I should be scared of Coffee Strong because you support Bradley Manning, we can openly ask them, like, so what do you think about what Bradley Manning did was wrong? And usually they come back with saying they've endangered, American soldiers. But the reality is, if anything, if what he's released makes the American public less interested in perhaps being at war in Afghanistan, he's helped save the lives of perhaps thousands of U.S. soldiers by bringing them home early.
Yeah. These would be good conversations to have with everybody, not just the folks who visit Coffee Strong. And we'll see, maybe we can generate some conversations by people who watch the program here. If somebody were thinking about recruiting, or if somebody, of joining in response to a recruitment, or if somebody has a young relative who's thinking about joining, what advice or information would you share with those people about military recruitment?
The advice I like to give mostly high school kids or young adults, I like to tell them my personal story, how I was treated in the military, how I was promised all these things that I would have when I joined the military, but obviously it's not false. It is false, sorry. They see it as a great honor to join the military. They see it as they're doing something for their country. That's great, but I like to tell them that there is more behind the scenes going on why you are thinking of going into the military. There's things involved that makes these kids want to join the military. It's video games, it's the U.S. Army. They have a video game center that has kids come in and play these video games like they are in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they have Army recruiters there waiting for them.
I usually tell young people, I stop short of telling them do not join. And the reason for that is I think a lot of young folks don't want to be told by older people what they should or shouldn't do.
Yeah, you're an older guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
in relation to that.
I try to tell them, my experience like Jorge does. I just say, this is my experience in the military. I felt the same way you did. After September 11th, I was very patriotic. I was raised in a family of men who all were in the military. So I feel the same way you did, and this is what happened afterwards. And then I usually like to point them to the fact that many of the real American heroes that we have, the folks that we really hold up in America as heroes, like Martin Luther King or Harriet Tubman or Rosa Parks, never were part of the military. In fact, they were fighting in social justice movements for people's rights. And so if you really want to be an American hero, if you really want to stand up for what's right, then get involved in social movements, get involved in improving your community, get involved in helping alleviate oppression or making people's everyday lives better, because that's where you're really going to be making a difference. In the military, you're going to go to a foreign country and occupy poor people. So in reality, you're not going to be doing very much positive good for your country. And usually they're much more responsive to that than me just going around saying, you know what, you shouldn't join the military.
Right. Yeah, nobody likes to be told what to do, especially somebody who's younger. I think this also, from a consumer protection standpoint, people need to know what their rights are, and they need to know that the things that the recruiter promises you, the military has no requirement that they actually follow through and do what the recruiter promises, even if it's in writing, even if it's in the contract. The contract that you sign is binding on you, the young person, but the military can do anything they want to you once you're in, and anything that's in writing doesn't matter. They promise you computer school, they promise you this, they promise you that. Doesn't matter anything. And U.S. Supreme Court cases have affirmed that.
Right, so I like to frame this as informed consent. In our country, we don't sit high school students down and really talk to them about U.S. foreign policy. We don't talk to them about the effects of the war on people. We don't talk about PTSD in high school. So when we do just about anything, if you want to do a human studies review in college, you have to go ask for, you have to do an ethical review board. And in that process, part of what you have to do is inform whoever it is that you're studying you have to make sure that they have informed consent, make sure that they're informed of what's going to happen as perhaps as a result of doing this study. there's no informed consent when it comes to joining the military, and it's
Right.
perhaps it's probably one of the riskiest behaviors that you can have as a young person, is joining the military, right? You're at increased risk for stress-related disorders, you're at increased risk for bodily harm, you're at increased risk for death, for sexual assault, for sexual harassment, all of these things, but they're not talked about in high school. So one of the things that we really push for is to get teachers to allow us into their classrooms so that we can act as sort of a vehicle for informed consent.
Right. Because if you believe what the recruiter says, just bear in mind that the recruiter is a salesperson.
Absolutely.
And if they don't meet their quota of enough recruits, they're back in the infantry or wherever it was that they came from. And so they're a salesperson. And don't believe what the salesperson tells you. Check it out and do some research from independent sources.
Salesperson wants to make that quota. Salesperson wants to hit their quota or go above their quota so that they get promoted faster, so they can get more money, so that they can, have the best recruiting station, in the state or whatever. Their whole job is to get you in the military.
Right.
Their job is not to be honest and open with you. I don't go to a car dealer and assume that everything the car dealer says is going to be the honest truth, because they have an interest, which is to get me in that car.
Right.
The recruiter's interest is to get me in the military.
Right.
And so we try to go in there and tell students that, the recruiter is not there to be your friend. The recruiter is there to get you into a set of Army BDUs and get you out there in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Right. Throughout the program, we've found a lot of points of commonality between you folks and soldiers and veterans and peace movement folks. The peace movement, as I said at the very beginning of the program, opposes wars, but I want to make sure that the people watching the program don't think that we oppose the individuals who are caught up in that. There's a myth that came along in the late 70s and early 80s that during the Vietnam era, peace activists were spitting on soldiers. And there's a historian in Ohio who tracked down the origin of those stories, and they were concocted fictitiously by some right-wing people who were trying to rewrite the history of Vietnam, and they had to write that up as part of their thing. And so that was actually a myth that was deliberately created to discredit the peace movement so that the American people would not want to be supporting peace. At the rallies, I was active in the peace movement during the Vietnam era, and at the rallies, the people that got the biggest applause as speakers were people who were veterans who said that they've been there, they came back, and they know that we need to stop the Vietnam War. They got the biggest applause. And my brother was drafted and sent to Vietnam, and his experience turned him against the war and against war in general. So I mean, there's people need to be open and recognize the commonality that we have, and not do the polarization, that some people try to do. How could viewers get more information? I know they could visit coffeestrong.org, www.coffeestrong.org, and they could visit, and you're at on the I-5, take exit 122, go west, turn right, north onto Union Avenue, and you're at 15109 Union Avenue Southwest in Lakewood, near a Subway sandwich shop. How else could people get information? You got information there. You got flyers, you got fact sheets, you got all kinds of resources.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We do branch out with, we talk to other groups as well, and they bring us other people to help out. We always get calls. I got a call the other day from the GI Rights hotline, said this guy should be calling pretty soon. Mm-hmm. There's different other, every other thing, sorry.
People can also find us on Facebook. If they look up Coffee Strong, they can find us on Facebook. They can find us on Twitter. We make a point of trying to reach out on any form of social media. If people would like to know more about sort of the GI resistance movement and sort of about being pro-soldier and anti-war, or about counter-recruitment, there are a number of books that they can go through and read. A book I would suggest is Winter Soldier. Oh, yeah. It was written following the Winter Soldier of 2008 that IVAW did. There's a really great there's a really good, great book that's a transcription of all those interviews. There's also a really interesting book by Chris Hedges that features IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against the War members. It's called collateral damage, collateral damage, and that's about soldiers speaking out on what happened while they were in Iraq. So there's a number of ways that people can get involved and try to find out more information about the movement.
Yeah, and the websites and organizations I mentioned earlier that we'll repeat at the end of the show, many of their websites have links to the other groups because everybody collaborates well. If somebody wanted to help in some way or participate, because you do have activities, I know you do events that are available to everybody, not just people in the military or veterans. So people could find out about your upcoming events and participate. I know you give active duty GIs free coffee, either regular drip coffee or the Americano, and you do that for free, which is not a great way to make money as a business. But how do you? It's a weird business model to give your stuff away for free. So how do you manage that?
Since we do that, we are a local nonprofit, and we rely on donations from people. That's why we're always out speaking, and we're at different things, like Tacoma is having their teacher strike. We're going out there showing support, and in return, they hear about what we do. I spoke today to a bunch of teachers on strike, and they were very receptive on what Coffee Strong is. We were giving them free coffee there bright and early.
Cool.
So one of them handed me $20. This is for you, Coffee Strong. Thank you for what you are doing. So we rely nothing on donations as sustaining donors.
Absolutely. If you go to our website, www.coffeestrong.org, on the right-hand side, there's a button that says, please donate. Folks can go to our website, click there and donate. Like you said, we actually make a joke that we're the worst capitalists in the world because the better we do at promoting GI resistance and helping out soldiers, the more coffee that we give away, the worse we do financially.
Right.
So unlike most businesses where you make more money because you're selling more goods, the more folks we have coming in our shop, the worse we do financially. So we rely on donations and support from all sorts of organizations. We've got quite a bit of help from Veterans for Peace. We're really thankful for them. We're really thankful for groups like Resist. Resist has provided us with a grant before.
It's a good foundation.
Iraq Veterans Against the War has provided us with funds before, and then we have a bunch of great, individual sustaining donors that just give, maybe $5, $10, or $30 a month, and that really helps us out.
I want to thank Jorge Gonzalez and Joseph Carter. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. War costs everybody in many ways. The United States' current wars are bankrupting our nation financially, turning world opinion against us, and the wars are costing our nation our principles and our soul. During this hour, we've focused specifically on several ways in which war hurts the people who fight and their families, and we focused especially on how active duty troops and veterans are working to correct our nation's problems and the injustices and to work for peace. So I respect the work that our two guests, Jorge Gonzalez and Joseph Carter, are doing to help people in the military and veterans. And when people are abused, those people need to stand up and assert their human dignity and actively work to protect their rights. And military active duty people and veterans are no different than others in that way. It's all about human rights and human dignity. So we support the organizations that are helping with that. You can get information about a wide variety of other issues and organizations through the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. We're at 360-491-9093 or olympiafor.org. If you happen to be watching this program on TCTV on a Thursday night in 2011, stay tuned for the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation's documentary series, The Big Picture, which starts at 10 p.m. This month's documentary film is titled Killing Us Softly 4. This is the fourth episode in a documentary series titled Killing Us Softly about gender stereotypes that damage people, especially women and girls. It exposes the images and messages that reinforce unrealistic and unhealthy perceptions of beauty, perfection, and sexuality. and that airs every Thursday at 10 p.m. and every Sunday at 10 p.m. throughout October 2011 on TCTV Cable Channel 22 in Thurston County, Washington. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.